The call came in at 2:47 a.m. When the paramedics arrived at the Wayside Motor Inn just outside Montgomery, Alabama, they found a man slumped in the driver's seat of a black Chevy Tahoe, engine still running, headlights cutting through the darkness. His skin was burning hot, his breathing shallow, his pulse racing like he'd run a marathon. But he hadn't been running, he'd been lying, and now his body was paying the price. The EMTs didn't recognize him at first, not until one of them noticed the gold wedding band on his left hand and the leather Bible on the passenger seat with his name embossed in gold. Pastor Raymond Ellis. A man who spent every Sunday telling his congregation how to live right. A man who preached about purity, faithfulness, and the dangers of temptation. And now, here he was, barely alive, outside a motel he had no reason to be at, in a town he'd told his wife he wasn't visiting. By the time the sun rose over Alabama that morning, doctors would uncover a medical mystery so disturbing and a secret so explosive it would tear his church, his family, and his entire reputation apart. This is the story of a man who built his life on trust and lost it all in one night. A story about faith, deception, and the dangerous collision between human weakness and digital anonymity. Who was Pastor Raymond Ellis, really? What was he hiding behind the sermons and the smiles? And who was the woman that turned his private sin into a public nightmare? A woman who weighed over 400 pounds, lived in the shadows of the internet, and carried secrets of her own that no one saw coming. To understand what happened inside that motel room and why it nearly killed him, we have to go back to the beginning, back to a small Alabama town where image was everything, where everyone knew everyone, and where one man's fall from grace would become the most talked-about scandal in years. Raymond Ellis wasn't born into ministry. He came to it later in life, after working in sales for over a decade and feeling, as he'd later describe it, spiritually empty. At 28, he enrolled in seminary school. At 30, he married his college sweetheart, a woman named Laura, who was quiet, supportive, and deeply faithful. By 35, he was leading a small congregation in Montgomery, and by 48, he was the senior pastor of New Hope Community Church, a thriving ministry with over 1,200 members, a live-streamed service every Sunday, and a reputation for powerful, emotional sermons that left people in tears. Raymond had a gift. He could make you feel seen. He could make you believe that no matter how far you'd fallen, redemption was possible. He preached about discipline, about resisting temptation, about the importance of accountability and living a life that honored God. But those who knew him well, really knew him, saw the cracks. Raymond was proud. He loved being admired. He loved the attention, the praise, the way people looked at him like he had all the answers. And when that attention started to fade at home, when his marriage became routine and his wife became distant, he didn't reach inward. He reached outward. He started spending more time online. More time counseling people privately through direct messages, more time alone. And that's when he met her. Her name, or at least the name she used, was Clarissa Jenkins. She was 37 years old, originally from Birmingham, and she weighed just over 400 pounds. She wasn't ashamed of it. In fact, she owned it. Her social media profiles were full of humor, self-deprecating jokes, and inspirational quotes about body positivity and self-love. She had a warmth to her, a way of making people feel comfortable. But beneath that warmth was something else. Loneliness. A deep, aching loneliness that came through in her late-night posts, her long ramblings about feeling invisible, about wanting to matter to someone. Raymond first encountered her in a faith-based online support group. She'd posted about struggling with depression and wanting to reconnect with God. He reached out privately, offered to pray with her, to counsel her. At first it was innocent. He genuinely wanted to help. But over time, the messages changed. They became longer, more personal. She started opening up about her past, her failed relationships, her insecurities. And he started sharing too. Things he'd never told his wife. things he didn't even want to admit to himself. Before either of them realized it, they'd crossed a line, and once that line was crossed, there was no going back. It was a Tuesday morning when Raymond told his wife he had to drive to Birmingham for a ministry conference. A small revival event, he said. Nothing major. He'd be back by Thursday. Laura didn't question it. She never did. Raymond had built a life where people trusted him completely, and that trust extended to his own home. He left early, around 9 a.m., kissing his wife on the forehead and grabbing his travel bag, but there was no conference, no revival, no ministry event. There was only Clarissa. They'd been planning to meet for weeks. She suggested a motel on the outskirts of Birmingham, somewhere quiet, somewhere no one would recognize him. The Wayside Motor Inn. A rundown place with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that buzzed in the late afternoon heat. Raymond checked in under a fake name, paid in cash, and texted her the room number. She arrived an hour later. When he opened the door, he saw her for the first time in person. Not just a profile picture, not just a voice on the phone, but her. All of her. And for a moment, he hesitated, but she smiled, and he let her in. What happened inside that room over the next few hours would later become the subject of police reports, medical investigations, and endless speculation. But what we know for certain is this. By the time the sun set, something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Raymond woke up around 10 p.m. feeling strange. His skin was hot, his hands were shaking. He felt dizzy, disoriented, like the room was spinning. Clarissa was already gone. He didn't remember her leaving. He didn't remember much of anything. He stumbled to his car, thinking he could drive back home, thinking he could sleep it off. But he didn't make it far. He pulled into the motel parking lot and collapsed against the steering wheel, barely conscious, his body shutting down. A passing truck driver saw him and called 911. When the paramedics arrived, they found him in shock, his body fighting an infection they couldn't immediately identify. They rushed him to Montgomery General Hospital, where doctors ran tests, trying to figure out what was happening. His temperature was spiking, his blood pressure was crashing, his body was in full crisis mode. Meanwhile, back at home, Laura received the call, not from her husband, but from the hospital. They told her he'd been found in Birmingham, alone, in a motel parking lot, and that he was in critical condition. She didn't understand. She kept asking, what was he doing there? Why didn't he call me? But no one had answers, and when investigators went looking for the woman he'd been with, they realized she wasn't who she claimed to be at all. The doctors at Montgomery General had seen infections before, bacterial, viral, fungal. But this was different. The infection had spread rapidly through Raymond's system, causing severe inflammation, organ stress, and symptoms that didn't match any standard diagnosis. Blood tests revealed traces of an unknown substance, something foreign, something that shouldn't have been in his body. The lead physician, Dr. Angela Winters, later described it as one of the strangest cases I'd encountered in 20 years of emergency medicine. She suspected it was linked to some kind of unsanitary contact, possibly involving contaminated materials or unregulated substances. But Raymond wasn't talking. He was barely conscious for the first 48 hours, and when he did wake up, he refused to give details. He kept saying, "It was a mistake. I made a mistake." By the third day, local media had picked up the story. Not the full story, but enough to spark rumors. Prominent Montgomery pastor hospitalized after mysterious illness. Local church leader in critical condition. Questions remain. The congregation was in shock. Prayer chains formed. Vigils were held. But behind the prayers there were whispers. And those whispers grew louder when police showed up at the hospital with questions of their own. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Detective Marcus Green was assigned to the case, not because a crime had been committed, at least not one they could prove yet, but because something wasn't adding up. Raymond had been found outside a motel, alone, unresponsive, with an infection no one could explain, and the woman he'd been with had vanished. Green and his team pulled surveillance footage from the Wayside Motor Inn. They saw Raymond check in. They saw a woman arrive about an hour later, large build, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses. She stayed for several hours, then left, alone. They ran the name she'd used to book a rideshare, Clarissa Jenkins. The phone number was disconnected. The email address was fake. The payment method was a prepaid debit card purchased with cash. No trail, no trace, no real identity. Green started digging deeper. He found social media profiles under that name. But the more he looked, the more inconsistencies he found. Different photos, different stories, different cities. It became clear that Clarissa Jenkins wasn't one person. She was a persona, a carefully constructed identity used across multiple platforms, targeting men, usually men of faith, usually men with something to lose. And Raymond Ellis wasn't the first. He was just the one who almost died. Back in Montgomery, the church was fracturing. Some members stood by Pastor Raymond, calling for grace and forgiveness, reminding everyone that we all fall short. Others were furious, calling him a hypocrite, demanding he step down immediately. The church board held an emergency meeting. Laura stopped coming to services. She stopped answering calls. She stayed home, blinds drawn, trying to process what her husband had done and what it meant for her, for their kids, for their entire life. Raymond's assistant, a man named Deacon Paul Thornton, spoke to a local news station. He looked tired, shaken. He said, "Pastor Raymond always preached about the dangers of temptation. He always said the devil comes in forms we don't expect. I just never thought it would be this literal." The comment went viral. Memes spread. Jokes were made. But beneath the humor was something darker, a collective disillusionment, a realization that the man they'd trusted with their spiritual lives had been living a lie, and the question everyone kept asking was the same. Who was the woman, and what did she do to him? The answer, when it finally came, would be more disturbing than anyone imagined. 3 weeks after the incident, Detective Green got a break. A woman in Georgia contacted the police after seeing news coverage of the case. She said she recognized the description. She'd been scammed by someone using a similar name, someone who'd promised her a miracle weight loss treatment, someone who'd convinced her to meet in person. The woman gave Green a phone number, an address, a name, not Clarissa Jenkins, but Patricia Cole, a 39-year-old woman from a small town outside Atlanta. When Green and his team located her, they found a woman living in a cluttered apartment filled with medical equipment, unlabeled vials, and handwritten notes detailing various experimental treatments she'd been testing on herself and others. Patricia Cole wasn't a doctor. She had no medical training, but she'd spent years researching alternative medicine, weight loss therapies, and homeopathic remedies online. She believed she'd discovered something groundbreaking, something that could help people like her lose weight without surgery, but she'd never tested it properly, never sought approval, never considered the risks. DNA analysis confirmed it. Patricia Cole was the woman who'd met Raymond Ellis at the Wayside Motor Inn, and the substance found in his bloodstream matched samples taken from her apartment. Patricia didn't see herself as a criminal. In her mind, she was helping people. She'd been using unlicensed homemade injections on herself for months, believing they were safe, believing they were working, and when men reached out to her online, men who were lonely, men who were curious, men who wanted something more than just conversation, she offered them something she thought was harmless, a treatment, a therapy, a way to make the experience more intimate. She never told them what it was. She never asked for consent. She just did it. And in Raymond's case, his body rejected it violently. The infection wasn't intentional. It was negligence. It was recklessness. It was a woman so desperate to be needed, so convinced of her own remedies that she ignored every warning sign. Detectives interviewed her for hours. She cried. She apologized. She insisted she never meant to hurt anyone. But the damage was done, and she wasn't the only victim of her delusions. Over the following weeks, other men came forward, men from different states, different churches, different backgrounds, all with similar stories, all with similar medical issues, a pastor from Tennessee, a deacon from Mississippi, a youth minister from Louisiana. All of them had met Patricia online, all of them had trusted her, and all of them had paid the price. Raymond Ellis survived. After multiple surgeries, weeks of antibiotics, and months of physical therapy, he recovered. But the man who walked out of that hospital wasn't the same man who'd walked into the Wayside Motor Inn. He was broken, humiliated, empty. In late September, he stood before what remained of his congregation and delivered his final sermon. His voice shook, his hands trembled. He said, "I stood before you for years and told you how to live. I told you to resist temptation, to honor your commitments, to seek God in your weakness, but I didn't follow my own advice. I thought I was strong enough. I thought I was different. I was wrong." He stepped down from ministry that day. Laura filed for divorce 2 months later. Their children stopped speaking to him. The church closed its doors 6 months after the scandal broke. Raymond moved to a small town in northern Alabama, took a job at a hardware store, and disappeared from public life. He later told a journalist, "I was supposed to save people, but I couldn't even save myself." Patricia Cole was arrested in November and charged with practicing medicine without a license, medical malpractice, fraud, and identity theft. Her trial lasted 3 weeks. The courtroom was packed. Victims testified. Doctors explained the dangers of her homemade treatments. Her defense attorney argued she was mentally ill, that she genuinely believed she was helping people. The jury didn't buy it. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in state prison. During her sentencing, the judge said, "You preyed on vulnerable men. You exploited their weaknesses. You put lives at risk. And you did it all under the guise of compassion." Patricia Cole looked at the judge and said, "They came to me for comfort. I only gave them what they wanted." She showed no remorse, no understanding of the harm she'd caused, and as she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the victims sat in silence, wondering how someone could be so blind to their own destruction. In the end, justice was served. But the damage was irreversible. Lives were shattered, families were torn apart, and a community that once believed in redemption learned that some falls are too far to come back from. So what do we take from this story? Was Raymond Ellis a victim? Or was he the architect of his own downfall? Was Patricia Cole a predator? Or just a deeply broken woman who convinced herself she was doing good? These are questions worth asking, because this wasn't just about one pastor and one woman. It was about pride, about loneliness, about the lies we tell ourselves when no one's watching. Raymond Ellis built his life on trust and lost it all in one night. Patricia Cole believed she was saving people and ended up destroying them. And in the middle of it all were real people, real families, real pain. If you were in Raymond's shoes, what would you have done differently? If you were someone who trusted him, someone who sat in those pews every Sunday, how would you feel knowing the man you looked up to was living a lie? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you thought this story was unbelievable, wait until you hear what happened in Tennessee, where another pastor's secret led to a disappearance that still haunts the town to this day. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our upcoming videos. Until next time.